The scent of blood reached him before the sound of the body hitting the floor. 3 floors above the kitchen, Lazlo Valerius froze. For 200 years he had mastered the art of restraint, of discipline, of pretending to be human. But he knew that heartbeat fading in the silence below. Saskia, the new chef. The woman he had avoided for 4 weeks with the discipline of a monk, because she smelled like the sunlight he could no longer touch. Now the building was whispering her death to him. Her heart faltered, stuttered, stopped. In that silence, Lazlo made a choice that would shatter his carefully constructed life. He could stay safe in the shadows, or he could move faster than any human should be able to move. He could let her die, or he could save her. But saving her meant doing the one thing he swore he never would. It meant feeding her his blood and claiming her as his own. The scent of blood reached Lazlo Valerius before the sound of the body hitting the floor. He stood motionless in his private study, 3 floors above the hotel's main kitchen, fingers frozen over the leather-bound ledger he'd been reviewing. The smell unfurled through the ventilation system like a crimson ribbon, sharp and metallic, laced with something else. Adrenaline, fear, the chemical signature of a human body shutting down. His head tilted, an unconscious predatory gesture he'd never quite suppressed even after 2 centuries of restraint. The building's bones carried sound differently to his ears. He could hear the fluorescent lights humming in the kitchen below, the industrial refrigerators cycling, the gas burners ticking as they cooled. And beneath it all, a heartbeat. Erratic, stuttering. Saskia. The name surfaced in his mind with unwelcome clarity. The new chef. 4 weeks she'd worked in his establishment, and he'd avoided her with the discipline of a monk. He'd learned her schedule, her patterns, the hours she arrived before dawn to prep her mise en place. He'd rearranged his own movements to ensure their paths never crossed. He'd been so careful. The heartbeat downstairs faltered, skipped, struggled to find its rhythm again. Lazlo's fingers pressed into the desk's edge, the wood groaning under pressure that would have shattered bone. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to blur through the building at the speed only his kind possessed. But he'd made rules for himself. Boundaries that kept him separate, kept him safe, kept the humans in his employ safer still. The heart below stuttered again, weaker this time. He closed his eyes and tried to remember the last time he'd allowed himself to care whether a human lived or died. The phone on his desk erupted, the internal line flashing. Lazlo stared at it for 3 rings before reaching out with supernatural stillness. His hand didn't shake. It never shook. Mr. Valerius. Renfield's voice carried the clipped urgency of his military background. Kitchen emergency. The chef's collapsed. Concierge has called emergency services. But sir, her pulse is. The line went dead. Not disconnected. Lazlo could still hear the open channel, the ambient noise of the lobby, but Renfield had stopped speaking, and in that silence, Lazlo understood what his head of security couldn't bring himself to say. He set the phone down with inhuman precision, each movement controlled, measured. The alternative was to move too fast, to reveal what he was, to shatter the careful illusion he'd maintained for decades. The scent of blood intensified. He could pass it now, separate the components. Type O negative. Healthy, until moments ago, no disease, no corruption. And underneath, something that made his jaw ache with the phantom pressure of fangs he refused to extend. She smelled like sunlight, like the warmth he could no longer touch. Lazlo moved to the window, overlooking the street. 5 floors below, the city pulsed with November cold, pedestrians hunched against wind that carried the first threat of snow. An ambulance would take 8 minutes to arrive, perhaps 10 given the evening traffic snarling the downtown core. He could hear her heart from here, fading, the rhythm stretching out like a song played too slow, notes drifting further apart. His reflection stared back from the darkened glass, pale skin that hadn't seen sun since 1823. Eyes that shifted between grey and something older when he forgot to control them. Dark hair that never grew, never changed, frozen in the moment of his turning. A monster wearing a gentleman's face. The heart below stopped. Just for a moment, 1 second, 2, then it lurched back into motion, a desperate flutter that wouldn't last. Lazlo's hand was on the door before conscious thought caught up with instinct. He wrenched it open, the hinges screaming, and the careful control he'd maintained for so long cracked down the center like ice over deep water. She was dying in his building, under his roof, in the kingdom he'd carved from stone and shadow and centuries of careful planning. The rules he'd made for himself suddenly seemed like luxuries he couldn't afford. The hallway blurred. Lazlo didn't remember deciding to move, only the sensation of air resistance becoming meaningless, of distance collapsing. The private elevator would take 40 seconds. The stairs were faster. He took them 3 at a time, then 5, then simply dropped from landing to landing, his body moving with the fluid grace of something that had forgotten how to be human. The impact of each landing would have shattered a mortal's legs. He felt nothing but the urgency singing through his veins. Her heartbeat pulled at him like a lodestone. Weak, so weak. The kitchen doors stood open. He forced himself to slow to approach at merely human speed for the last few steps. The concierge knelt beside Saskia's body, phone pressed to his ear, speaking to the emergency dispatcher with admirable calm given the circumstances. No pulse that I can find. I'm starting compressions now. Lazlo's eyes found her. She lay on her back on the industrial tile, one arm flung out, fingers still curled as if reaching for something. Her chef's whites were pristine, except for a dark stain spreading from beneath her head. The scent of blood roared through him, primal and overwhelming. But it was her face that stopped him. Even unconscious, even dying, she was luminous. Dark hair escaping from her bun, olive skin going pale, lips parted on a breath that wouldn't come. He'd glimpsed her before, always from a distance, always careful to look away. Up close she was devastating. The concierge looked up, startled. "Mr. Valerius, I didn't hear you. The ambulance is coming, but she's not." "Leave." Lazlo's voice came out rougher than intended, scraped raw by needs he couldn't name. "Sir, I need to continue CPR until... leave, now." The compulsion threaded through his words before he could stop it, ancient power that turned suggestion into command. The concierge's eyes glazed. He set down the phone carefully, rose and walked out without another word. Lazlo dropped to his knees beside Saskia's body. Her heart had stopped completely now. He could smell death approaching, that particular coldness that crept through flesh when the spirit prepared to depart. 30 seconds, perhaps 40, before brain damage became irreversible. Before she crossed a threshold even he couldn't pull her back from. He had one option, one choice that violated every rule he'd sworn to uphold. His wrist came up to his mouth, fangs extended with a sensation like knives sliding from sheaths. The pain was exquisite, familiar, welcome after so long denying this part of himself. The bite was quick, clinical, his blood welled up dark and ancient, carrying the weight of centuries. Lazlo caught Saskia's jaw, tilted her head back, and pressed his bleeding wrist to her lips. "Drink," he whispered, though she couldn't hear him. "Come back." His blood slipped past her lips, over her tongue, down her throat. For a moment, nothing happened. The kitchen hummed around them, indifferent machinery that cared nothing for life or death. Then her body convulsed. The effect was immediate and violent. Her back arched off the floor, every muscle seizing. Lazlo held her steady, his free hand cradling her head, keeping her from injuring herself further. His blood worked through her system like wildfire, seeking out the damage, repairing, restoring. Her heart kicked once, twice, found its rhythm again, stronger than before. Color flooded back into her face. The deathly pallor receded, replaced by something that glowed from within. Her lips, stained with his blood, parted on a gasp that sounded like a drowning woman breaking the surface. Lazlo pulled his wrist away, watching the wound seal itself with the speed of his kind. He wiped the remaining blood from his mouth with the back of his hand, aware that his eyes would be fully crimson now. The pretense of humanity burned away. Saskia's eyes snapped open. They were brown. He'd known that from her employment file, but now they carried flecks of gold that hadn't been there before, metallic and bright, catching the fluorescent light like coins at the bottom of a well. She stared up at him, consciousness returning in waves. Her lips moved, forming words that wouldn't come. In the distance, sirens wailed, growing closer. Lazlo remained frozen above her, his hand still cradling her head, watching those strange new eyes focus on his face with an intensity that felt like recognition. Like she'd been waiting her whole life to see him. The sirens screamed closer, their wail cutting through the underground parking structure like knives through silk. Lazlo watched the gold flecks in Saskia's eyes pulse with each beat of her newly strengthened heart. Her pupils dilated, contracted, dilated again, adjusting to a world that had suddenly become sharper, more vivid. She could see the individual dust motes suspended in the fluorescent light above them, could hear the electrical hum of the bulbs, a frequency that should have been beyond human perception. Her hand shot up, fingers wrapping around his wrist with surprising strength. Not pulling him away, but anchoring herself to something solid in a reality that had just tilted sideways. "What did you do?" The words came out rough, her throat still raw from screaming. But her voice carried an undertone now, something that resonated in frequencies that made the air between them vibrate. Lazlo released her head carefully, sitting back on his heels. His crimson eyes hadn't faded. Couldn't fade, not with the taste of her still on his tongue, the scent of her blood singing through his system like a drug he'd never encountered before. "I saved your life." The ambulance pulled into the garage, its headlights sweeping across the concrete pillars. Red and white strobes painted the scene in alternating flashes of emergency and surrender. "We need to move." Lazlo stood in one fluid motion, extending his hand to her. Saskia stared at his offered palm. She could see things she shouldn't be able to see. The faint network of veins beneath his skin, carrying blood that moved too slowly, too deliberately. The way his chest didn't rise and fall with breath. The absolute stillness of him, like a statue that had learned to walk. She took his hand anyway. The contact sent electricity up her arm, raising every hair on her body. Lazlo pulled her to her feet with effortless strength, steadying her when her legs threatened to buckle. The world swam, then snapped into focus with painful clarity. She could smell everything. The oil stains on the concrete, the rubber from the tires, the metallic tang of her own blood, still wet on the ground, and beneath it all, something ancient and dark that rolled off Lazlo in waves. "Gent, we need you to stay still." The paramedics were out of the ambulance, rushing toward them with a gurney and medical bags. Lazlo's hand tightened on hers. "Do you trust me?" It was an absurd question. She'd known him for 3 weeks, had served him dinner, watched him move through the restaurant with the grace of something that had forgotten how to be human, had felt his eyes on her even when she wasn't looking. "No," she whispered. His mouth curved, just slightly. "Smart woman." Then he moved, and the world blurred. Saskia felt herself lifted, cradled against his chest as Lazlo covered the distance to his car in strides that shouldn't have been possible. The parking garage became a smear of concrete and shadow. The paramedics' shouts faded behind them. He had her in the passenger seat of the Bentley before her mind could process that they'd moved at all. The door closed with a whisper of expensive engineering. Lazlo was behind the wheel, a heartbeat later, the engine purring to life with a sound like distant thunder. "Wait." Saskia's hand found the door handle. "I can't just leave. They'll think you were in shock," and wandered off. "Renfield is already handling it." Lazlo pulled out of the parking space, navigating toward the exit with practiced ease. "Your daughter is safe. That's what matters." Pippa. The name cut through the fog in Saskia's head like a blade. "Where is she?" "At my penthouse, under guard." The Bentley emerged into the night, merging with traffic that seemed to part around them. "She's frightened, but unharmed. I had my head of security retrieve her from school the moment I received word of the incident." Saskia turned to stare at him, really look at him for the first time since waking. His profile was carved from marble, all sharp angles and aristocratic lines. The streetlights sliding past painted him in alternating darkness and gold, but his eyes remained that impossible crimson. They reflected light, like an animal's, catching and holding it. "What are you?" The question came out steadier than she felt. Lazlo's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The leather creaked under his grip. "What do you think I am?" She'd read the stories. Everyone had. Dracula, Anne Rice, True Blood, Twilight, 100 different versions of the same myth, dressed up in different clothes. But myths didn't pull you back from death with their blood. Myths didn't move faster than the eye could follow. That's not possible. But even as she said it, she could feel the changes in her body. The way her senses had sharpened to razor edges, the strength in her limbs that hadn't been there before, the hunger beginning to curl in her stomach, different from anything she'd ever felt. "You're still human," Lazlo said, as if reading her thoughts. "My blood will fade from your system within days. But while it's there, you'll experience certain enhancements. Increased strength, heightened senses, accelerated healing." He paused, "and a connection to me that will be difficult to ignore." The Bentley glided through downtown, heading toward the high-rise district, where glass towers scraped the sky. Saskia pressed her palm against the window, feeling the cool glass against her skin. Her reflection stared back, and for a moment she saw the gold flecks in her eyes flash like coins catching firelight. Marek did this. It wasn't a question. She'd known, in that moment when the shadows had wrapped around her throat, that her ex-husband had finally made good on his threats. 3 years of restraining orders and court battles, and he'd still found a way. "Marek Hearth is an occultist." Lazlo's voice dropped, taking on an edge that made the air in the car feel heavier. Not a particularly powerful one, but dangerous nonetheless. He's been attempting to summon entities beyond his control, bargaining with forces that would consume him if they could. "Why?" Saskia's voice cracked. "Why would he, your daughter?" Lazlo pulled into an underground garage beneath one of the tallest buildings in the city. Security gates opened automatically. Recognizing the car, Pippa carries something in her bloodline, something old and potent. Marek believes he can use her to complete a ritual that would grant him genuine power. The garage was pristine, each parking space marked with precision. Lazlo pulled into a spot near a private elevator, the kind that required a key to access. He killed the engine, and the sudden silence felt oppressive. "How do you know all this?" Saskia turned to face him fully, her back against the passenger door. "How long have you been watching us?" Lazlo's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or calculation. 6 months. Since Marek first attempted to breach my territory with his rituals, I've been tracking his movements, his contacts, his obsessions. He met her gaze. You and Pippa appeared in every thread I pulled. 6 months. Saskia's mind raced backward, trying to remember when she'd first felt watched. When the sensation of eyes on her back had started. You hired me. I needed you close, where I could protect you. Lazlo reached for the door handle, then stopped. I know how this sounds, but everything I've done has been to keep you and your daughter alive, by making me drink your blood. The words came out sharper than she intended, edged with panic she'd been suppressing. By making sure Marek's spell didn't kill you. Lazlo's voice remained steady, patient. The shadows he sent were designed to drain your life force slowly, to weaken you until you were too broken to resist. When he came for Pippa, my blood burned them out of your system. It also marked you as mine. The last word hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Saskia wasn't ready to examine. I don't belong to anyone. She reached for the door handle, needing space, needing air that didn't smell like leather and something ancient. Lazlo was out of the car and at her door before she could open it, moving with that impossible speed again. He offered his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. The contact sent another jolt through her system, and she saw his eyes flare brighter. "The elevator," he said simply, leading her toward the brushed steel doors. The ride up was silent. Saskia watched the floor numbers climb, her reflection multiplied in the mirrored walls. She looked the same, brown hair pulled back in a messy bun, chef's white stained with sauce and her own blood. But the woman staring back had gold in her eyes and moved with a grace that hadn't been there before. The elevator opened directly into a penthouse that took her breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around 3 walls, offering a view of the city that made her feel like she was floating. The space was decorated in dark woods and deep blues, expensive but not ostentatious. Art that looked original hung on the walls. A grand piano sat in one corner, its surface gleaming. "Mama!" Pippa burst from a doorway, her 7-year-old body colliding with Saskia's legs hard enough to make her stumble. Saskia dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms around her daughter, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo and the chocolate she'd probably convinced someone to give her. "Baby, are you okay?" Saskia pulled back, checking Pippa's face, her arms, looking for any sign of harm. "I'm fine. Mr. Renfield let me watch cartoons and gave me hot chocolate." Pippa's eyes were wide, excited rather than frightened. "Mama, this place is so cool. There's a whole room just for books, and the bathroom has a tub big enough to swim in." Saskia looked up to find a man standing in the doorway. Pippa had emerged from, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair and the bearing of military training. His eyes were sharp, assessing, but kind when they landed on Pippa. "Renfield," Lazlo said, by way of introduction. "My head of security." Renfield inclined his head. "Miss Gent, I'm glad to see you recovered. Thank you for watching her." Saskia stood, keeping Pippa close. "But we should go. We can't impose. You're not safe." Lazlo had moved to the windows, his silhouette dark against the city lights. Marek's spell failed, but he'll try again. Stronger this time. More direct. Pippa tugged on Saskia's sleeve. "Mama, why do your eyes look funny?" Saskia touched her face automatically, feeling the heat in her cheeks. "It's nothing, baby. Just the light." "You're lying." Pippa's voice carried the absolute certainty of childhood. "You always touch your ear when you lie." Lazlo turned from the window, and for the first time, Saskia saw something like amusement soften his features. "She's perceptive. She's 7. Saskia's hand dropped from her ear. "And she doesn't need to be involved in whatever this is." "She's already involved." Lazlo crossed the room, moving with that predatory grace. He stopped a careful distance away, respecting her space. "Marek won't stop. He can't. He's made bargains with entities that will consume him if he fails to deliver what he's promised. And what he's promised is Pippa." The words hit like physical blows. Saskia pulled her daughter closer, feeling the fragile warmth of her, the quick rabbit beat of her heart. "Then we run. We leave the city, change our names. He'll find you." Lazlo's voice was gentle but implacable. "His magic is tied to your bloodline now. He can track you anywhere in the world. Then what do you suggest?" Saskia heard the desperation in her own voice and hated it. "I'm supposed to just trust you." She glanced at Pippa, lowering her voice. "A vampire?" Pippa's head snapped up. "Really? That's so cool. Not now, baby." Saskia kept her eyes on Lazlo. "What do you want from us?" Lazlo was quiet for a long moment, his crimson eyes searching her face. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries, a union, formal and binding. "In the eyes of my kind, you would become my consort. Pippa would be under my protection as family. Marek wouldn't dare touch either of you without declaring war on my entire bloodline." The word consort hung in the air like smoke. Saskia's laugh came out brittle. "You're asking me to marry you. I'm asking you to let me protect you. The ritual is symbolic, but the protection is real." Lazlo moved closer, and Saskia caught his scent again. Old books and winter nights, and something that made her blood sing. "I won't touch you, won't demand anything beyond the public appearance of unity. But you'll be safe. Both of you." "Why?" The question came out raw. "Why do you care?" Lazlo's expression shifted, something ancient and painful flickering across his features. "Because I've lived 800 years, and I've never felt anything like what I felt when I tasted your blood. Because your daughter carries magic in her veins that could change the balance of power in this city." The elevator chimed. Everyone froze. Renfield's hand went to his jacket, where Saskia now realized he carried a weapon. Lazlo's entire body tensed, his eyes blazing brighter. "No one has access to this floor," Renfield said quietly. "No one except..." The elevator doors opened. Marek Hearth stepped out, and Saskia's world contracted to a pinpoint of terror. He looked the same as he had 3 years ago. Sandy hair, average height, the kind of face that disappeared in crowds, but his eyes had changed. They were black from lid to lid, reflecting nothing. In his hand he held something that pulsed with sickly green light. An artifact carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. "Hello, Saskia." Marek's voice was wrong, layered with harmonics that didn't belong in a human throat. "Time to come home." Lazlo stepped between them, but the moment he came within 10 feet of the artifact, he staggered. His skin went grey, the vitality draining from him like water from a broken vessel. Saskia felt it through the connection his blood had forged, felt his strength failing, his ancient power guttering like a candle in a storm. Marek smiled, and it was the smile of something wearing her ex-husband's face like a mask. Did you really think a vampire could protect them from me? The artifact's sickly pulse filled the penthouse with wrongness, but Saskia felt something else through the blood bond, not weakness, but restraint. Lazlo wasn't failing. He was holding back, afraid of what his full power might do in close quarters with Pippa nearby. "Mommy," Pippa's small voice cut through the tension. Saskia's maternal instinct overrode her terror. She scooped her daughter up, backing toward the windows, putting distance between Pippa and whatever wore Marek's face. The child's weight in her arms felt like an anchor to everything real and worth protecting. "That's far enough." Marek's layered voice scraped against her eardrums. The artifact pulsed brighter, and black veins spread from his hand up his arm, writhing beneath his skin like living ink. "She comes with me. The child, too. Their blood belongs to the Covenant." The Covenant fell 3 centuries ago. Lazlo's voice had dropped to a register that made the windows vibrate. Despite the artifact's influence, he straightened, and Saskia saw something shift in his posture. A predator done with pretense. "I was there when we burned your temples to ash." Marek laughed, and the sound held too many throats. "You burned buildings. The work continued. It always continues. And now, after all this time, a bloodline pure enough to Renfield." Lazlo didn't raise his voice, but command saturated every syllable. "Take them to the safe room. Now." The head of security moved with inhuman speed, but Marek was faster. He thrust the artifact forward, and a wave of green energy exploded outward. Renfield hit the floor, convulsing. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness, broken only by the artifact's nauseating glow and the crimson blaze of Lazlo's eyes. Those eyes found Saskia's in the dark. Through the bond she felt his intention, not words but pure meaning. "Trust me. Protect her. Whatever happens, don't look away." She nodded, not knowing if he could see it, but feeling his acknowledgement through the connection. "You can't touch me while I hold this." Marek advanced, the artifact held before him like a shield, forged from the bones of the first vampire your kind ever killed. It remembers that death. It hungers for it. "I know what it is." Lazlo's voice had gone quiet, almost conversational, but Saskia felt the temperature in the room plummet. Her breath misted in the air. Frost crept across the windows behind her. "I know because I was there when Erasmus fell. I held him while he burned. And I swore on his ashes that I would end anyone who dared use his death as a weapon." He took a step forward. The artifact flared, and Lazlo's skin grayed again, but he didn't stop. Another step. The marble beneath his feet cracked, spiderwebbing outward. Impossible. For the first time, uncertainty colored Marek's layered voice. "You should be ash by now. The bone remembers, and I remember better." Another step. Lazlo's form seemed to expand, shadows peeling away from him like wings. "I remember every vampire who fell to your Covenant's blades. I remember their names, their faces, the way they screamed when your priests burned them alive." The air pressure dropped so suddenly that Saskia's ears popped. Pippa whimpered, burying her face in her mother's neck. "I remember," Lazlo continued, his voice building, "because I am the one who survived. I am the one who hunted your priests through the catacombs of Prague, who found your hidden temples in Istanbul, in Cairo, in Shanghai. I am the reason your Covenant fell, Marek Hearth. I am the reason you hide in stolen bodies and whisper in the dark." He was close enough now that the artifact's light cast his shadow across Marek's face. That shadow moved wrong, reaching with fingers that weren't quite fingers. "And you dare?" Lazlo's eyes blazed so bright that Saskia had to squint against their glare. You dare to threaten what is mine." The last word wasn't spoken. It was roared, and the sound contained centuries of fury held in check, of predator finally unleashed. Every window in the penthouse shattered outward in a glittering cascade. The artifact's green light guttered like a candle in a hurricane. Marek stumbled backward, and for just a moment, Saskia saw past the thing wearing his face, saw the true horror underneath, something ancient and hungry that had been using her ex-husband like a puppet, using his obsession with the occult to find a doorway into the world. "No," the entity's voice cracked, multiple tones splitting apart. "The artifact, it should, you can't. Your artifact was forged to kill vampires who feared death." Lazlo's hand shot out, faster than thought, and closed around Marek's throat. He lifted the possessed man off the ground with one hand, effortless as lifting a child's toy. "I stopped fearing death 800 years ago. Now I am what death fears." The shadows in the room weren't shadows anymore. They were extensions of Lazlo's will, writhing and coiling around Marek's body, prying at the seams where the entity clung to its stolen flesh. The artifact fell from nerveless fingers, its light dying as it hit the floor. Saskia watched, unable to look away as Lazlo's true nature manifested. This was the Vampire King, not the careful businessman who'd hired her, not the conflicted man who'd tasted her blood with reverence. This was the apex predator who'd survived centuries of hunters, who'd toppled secret societies and walked away from wars that had destroyed nations. "You will release him." Each word fell like a hammer blow. "You will return to whatever hole spawned you, and you will never, never come near my family again." The entity screamed, a sound that came from Marek's mouth but belonged to something far older. Black smoke poured from his eyes, his nose, his ears, writhing in Lazlo's grip like a living thing trying to escape. The shadows tightened, and the smoke compressed, condensing into a sphere of roiling darkness that Lazlo held in his free hand. "Begone." He crushed it. The sphere imploded with a sound like reality tearing, and then there was nothing but silence and the smell of ozone. Marek's body went limp. Lazlo lowered him carefully to the floor, and Saskia saw with shock that her ex-husband was breathing, unconscious but alive. The shadows receded, the temperature normalized. Lazlo turned to face her, and his eyes had dimmed to their normal crimson glow. He looked exhausted, ancient in a way she'd never seen before. "Saskia." Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "Are you his Pippa? We're okay." Her voice shook, but she meant it. Pippa had hidden her face through the worst of it, and Saskia had been the shield. Is Marek. The entity is gone, destroyed. Your ex-husband will wake with no memory of being possessed, though he'll need help dealing with what led him to dabble in forces he didn't understand. Lazlo moved toward them slowly, carefully, like approaching a frightened animal. "I'm sorry you had to see that. See me like that." Saskia looked at him, really looked. At the man who'd just shattered windows with his voice and torn an ancient evil from her ex-husband's body with his bare hands. The man who'd hired her to cook for him because he was lonely. Who'd tasted her blood and called it transcendent. Who'd stood between her daughter and danger without hesitation. "Don't apologize." She shifted Pippa's weight, reaching out with her free hand. "You saved us." His fingers intertwined with hers, cool and solid, and through the bond she felt his relief, his fear that she would reject him now that she'd seen the monster beneath the man. "You're not a monster," she whispered, and his eyes widened. "I can feel what you feel, remember. I know what you were afraid of. But Lazlo, you're the furthest thing from a monster I've ever known." Behind them, Renfield groaned and sat up, immediately checking his weapon. The elevator chimed again, and this time it was the private doctor, summoned by some silent alarm, arriving with a team to handle Marek and assess the damage. But Saskia only had eyes for Lazlo, and the way he looked at her like she'd just given him something more precious than blood, more vital than immortality itself. Hope. 3 hours later, the penthouse had been cleaned, the windows temporarily boarded, and Marek had been taken to a secure facility where he'd receive the psychiatric help he desperately needed. Pippa slept in her new bedroom, exhausted by the night's events but unharmed, watched over by 2 of Renfield's most trusted guards. Saskia stood at the boarded window, wrapped in one of Lazlo's shirts, watching the city lights filter through the cracks. She felt him approach before he touched her, the bond between them humming with awareness. "You should rest," he said softly. "So should you." She turned into his embrace, letting him wrap his arms around her. "But neither of us will we? Probably not." A hint of humor colored his voice. "It's been a very long night, Lazlo." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "What happens now?" He was quiet for a moment, and she felt him choosing his words carefully through the bond. "Now we figure out how to be a family. However unconventional that family might be." He hesitated. "If that's what you want." Saskia thought about her daughter sleeping safely down the hall, about the man who'd faced down ancient evil to protect them, about the blood bond that let her feel his emotions, his sincerity, his desperate hope that she wouldn't walk away. "I want that," she said. "I'm terrified, and this is insane, and I have no idea how we're going to make it work. But I want that." His smile was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. He kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent, and she felt his joy through the bond like champagne bubbles in her blood. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm, unaware that in a penthouse high above the streets, a new kind of family had been born, one forged in blood and shadow and the fierce determination to protect what mattered most. Saskia closed her eyes and listened to the sound of Lazlo's unnecessary breathing, a habit from his human life that he'd never quite broken. In the distance, she heard Pippa's soft snores through the open bedroom door, and for the first time in 3 years she felt safe.